Welcome back. I hope you demolished as many muffins as Julian asked. If you didn't, go and grab a carrier bag or something and take them home. Up on the screen, you're looking very large there. We have Matt Neece from Perpetual. And you may or may not have heard of Perpetual, but basically, if there's a financial services organization out there that needs to do regulatory reporting or looking for deeper insights, you've got a 90% chance that Perpetual are looking after that for that organization. I've got a few questions again in there. So you have to pretend for this, unfortunately, that both Dan and Knowles are financial services people who are very into money markets and looking after customer data. But obviously they've been engaged with many of those organizations, so they're going to put their sort of, as they have seen it out in the market, position on. As Julian said, so we have had one dropout at least. So what if we've got time at the end of this? I'm probably going to let Matt go, and then we will do a couple of questions from the floor for what anybody and everybody has talked about this morning, and let you get your burning questions answered if you didn't get to talk to Knowles or Dan in the break. Without further ado, I will start with Matt. From a regulation perspective, how have you changed your approach to data management and insights as a financial services insights organization?
Okay, I'll jump into that, and thank you for having me. And just for everyone on the other side of the screen, I'm looking at my computer screen and it's black, and so apologies if it's slightly impersonal. So to the question around, from a data management perspective around regulatory change and how we changed our approach, I guess a little bit of background there. I'm the head of product for our data and analytics solutions business at Perpetual. This business specifically has been set up to help financial organizations deal with this changing regulatory landscape, and more broadly, management of their data assets and getting the most out of that. So from a Perpetual perspective, my team is a bit isolated from that, but our business specifically has been set up to help manage those organizations. And what we've done is we've created a cloud-native data platform on the back of 20 years of gathering mortgage loan data across securitized assets for almost every securitizing lending bank in the country. And today, we support them in supplying that data through to the Reserve Bank, for example, for management of their committed liquidity facility for repo eligibility of assets, which under circumstances like we're going through at the moment is becoming a really important mechanism. Also supporting organizations in making available information through to the likes of APRA, for example, for capital reporting. We've done that we're supporting these organizations by investing in the right technologies and the right methodologies to help them move a lot more nimbly, to have them give them a lot more clarity and a lot more confidence in their ability to meet the regulatory expectations at speed and be able to make changes quickly. A lot of the problems, a lot of the financial services, and just more broadly, a lot of the established corporations, I suppose, or organizations have, is that they've got, they may have strong technology teams, they may not, but often where they have a good BI capability or a strong technical capability, there some requirements often will sit in a prioritization backlog. They may have a really hard time actually getting the right people to work on their projects. And so whilst they might even be able to do it themselves well, it may be that they're not be able to return those turnaround times to meet the regulatory requirement in time. And so transparency into that information and the ability to move quickly has been, I guess, key to the success of our business, and is a really compelling, I guess, value add to our clients.
Cool, thank you. And similar question to Noel's, in all of the financial services pieces you've had, have you seen that regulation has affected or not some of our major organisations in Australia and New Zealand?
Well, I'll essentially outline some of the challenges that particularly the superannuation industry went through, where the reporting went from 7 basic reports to 49 full-blown reports, all the way down to the investment level and the instruments they used, and they had 18 months to achieve this type of thing. So the speed, and this is echoing what Matt is pointing out, the speed that's required to adapt to both regulatory and business pressures has gone up exponentially. So those are the kind of examples that sort of drive home this idea of we need to remove the inefficiencies out of your processes and so on. So it's interesting that when data warehousing industry was quite young, it was an 80-20 rule. 80% of them failed, 20% didn't. So in the beginning, everyone was about, it's kind of emerging, kind of understanding how it goes. Now, we've improved over the years, over the 30-odd years that the industry's been going gangbusters, to a 50-50 chance. So we've had 30 years and only 30% improvement, so we need to understand the fundamentals as to what's holding us back. And so when we start looking at the underlying problems that is accentuated, or put a microscope on the speed components, it's only then that it becomes apparent that the way we've gone about it, yes, we got 30% more efficient at it, but doing a bad job still nonetheless. So this is something that from financial industries is becoming apparent. There is no luxury remaining for trying to do the thing, same old. You have to adapt, you have to change. And so Data Vault is the viable alternative that's progressively more recognized, as earlier quoted by the Eckerson Group, that if you look at the statement, it's the most significant change in the data management space since dimensional modeling came around 30 years ago. It's a fairly substantial claim to make. So I think that there is a cognizance of it needs to change, because there is no margin for wasting any more effort. And I think that's a general sense that's sort of driving a lot of the industry.
Yeah, cool. And Dan, from the US perspective, SOX compliance or any other regulatory side that's hitting US financial services?
Well, from a US perspective, I am just getting engaged at that level. I've spent a majority of my time helping other countries that are more advanced, including Australia and Germany, Switzerland, Finland, and the UK. But from the US perspective, yes, regulation and more regulatory compliance is coming down the pike. And as Noel's iterated, it's not just doing the same thing faster and achieving worse results. It's doing things better and achieving better results, right? So there's a change in the way we think. And compliance, I just want to make this point. Compliance, a lot of people go, well, we have to meet the auditor's reports to be compliant, but that's not the only angle. Compliance these days, well, at least always from my perspective, but these days compliance means so much more. It means passing an audit if someone walks in internally, externally, third party. It means balancing of your assets or your books down to 0.1%. It means traceability of that data and knowing where that 0.1% is or was, and why it's an error or why it's out of balance. Being in compliance means protecting your data and then being able to prove it through lineage and metadata. So don't walk away from this discussion thinking that compliance is just some regulatory agency issuing an edict that your company must apply. No, this touches you when you build your solution, and it touches everything you do, whether or not you're a consultant in a financial industry or a consultant in a medical or healthcare side of the house.
Thank you. I think financial services with the emergence of open banking and the like is probably one of the biggest where we're going to see ongoing upheaval from a customer demand perspective. Matt, it's sort of on the edge of what you do, but do you see that this push from the customer side affecting the sort of things that you do?
Yeah, look, it'll very much be relevant to our clients and our practices, and there's probably, I guess, a few different angles there. Firstly, the changes like CCR and open banking will impact every lender and most consumers in the market. It'll take a long time, in my mind, to really mature, but it's going to both put pressure on organizations to be able to comply with the standards. So, for example, with open banking, you'll have the smaller organizations who their first and primary focus will just be, how do I actually supply the relevant information for regarding my clients to organizations who have been given the authority to receive that information, and how do I get the technical capability to do that quickly and meet the SLAs under open banking. And then the second lens that they'll apply, and hopefully they're able to do it sooner than later, is how do we actually create value for our business and our consumers or our clients out of this process as well, instead of just looking at it from a pure compliance perspective. It very well may open up the competition landscape where you have, for example, these very large organizations, the major banks, who will have very, very large client books across multiple portfolios, across mortgages, credit cards, personal loans, and to have a really, really large data footprint across a particular client or consumer. And open banking has the opportunity to allow smaller organizations who have a much more niche product or market footprint to be able to collect and take advantage of these other data attributes or this broader data profile for their clients. And so they may be able to apply it to an improved lending rate, for example, because they have more data for a particular consumer, or they may be able to apply risk-based pricing on particular products because they have the right data to start to do that. That's certainly part of the conversation that we have today with clients. Another side of that is also, you've got your direct to consumer part of the business, and then you also have your back office functions, which in a lot of ways a lot of these regulatory changes do not have an immediate impact to, but the data available today will very much support improvements in those processes as well. For example, we have a 20-year data warehouse of loan records that we're able to, with the consent of the underlying suppliers of that data, look into and find trends and support the credit functions within organizations in their overall portfolio management to be able to help them to predict potential loss in their portfolio given certain macroeconomic stress that impacts the portfolio. And this is not something that's a direct engagement between the business and that consumer, but it's more of a back office function where, this is not where technology investment generally applies, but we're really starting to be able to take a lot of those data assets and apply them in an efficient way to support back office functions like credit risk and like treasury in banking operations.
Cool. Following on from that, I think in Australia and around, are you seeing that organizations are seeing this data transparency, portability as an opportunity or a risk? And similarly in the back office side, is this really truly going well? The back office process has to come to the fore for customer facing. So two parts. So I'll give are you seeing this as an opportunity or versus a risk to Knowles?
It's definitely a significant opportunity to organizations because for whether conscious or unconsciously, I think the industry is getting to the point where information is an asset. So it is something that holds value both internally and externally to the organization. But it's behaving like a data democracy in some way, in that you have to contribute to leverage. And so from that perspective, it's bringing that kind of concept that's been around for a long time, but is not necessarily called that much in the open banking or the data sharing perspective. But it's now starting giving it value, then values in whether it protects or whether it optimizes, and so whether you are essentially doing the appropriate pricing, has been noted by Matt, or whether you are essentially mitigating a risk, be it from a fraud or a churn or a opportunity cost perspective on how these components bring it. So yes, it is recognized, but it's relatively in its infancy when it comes to the Australian market. And so from that perspective, looking forward very much to see how it goes along. The other incidental consequence to all of this is everyone starts to talking about the same definitions. By virtue of being able to contribute to an open data democracy or to a sharing platform, the discipline around being able to define, to be able to track, to trace, to essentially adhere to or provide apples for apples is a necessity. It's a kind of discipline that should already exist within your organization if you want to participate. So there's a little bit of a homework implication for organizations to get this right in order to participate. But the value is certainly there. Because if you start looking and assessing a underwriting risk associated to a particular client, but you only have the lens of what your information set holds, may miss the fact that they are a serial offender of some sort in some or other financial sense. So that's where the open economy is going to help you do so. Now, of course, you can decide to price it appropriately and therefore offer it, and they may choose to differentiate away, which is fantastic. Depends on what your aim is, but from that perspective, it's a great opportunity for the Australian marketplace.
Cool. And Dan, I'll give you the second half, which is in respect of really looking at the business processes that go on and actually making that a true customer empathetic, customer-facing piece. Are you seeing much of that, and of course, where Data Vault may be able to help out on that?
Yes and no. I just wanted to say that the tongue-in-cheek response to the first question is it's a risky opportunity unless it's governed. But in terms of the benefit and what's going on, in the U.S. we see it more in the healthcare industry first, because there's a need in the U.S. Since Obamacare passed years ago. We're now seeing health exchanges pop up. So it's not so much in the financial industry yet in the U.S., so much as it is in the healthcare industry. And now, of course, with everything that's happening with coronavirus and everywhere else, I can see that taking center stage. Of course, me being who I am, I'm going to say that Data Vault can help you, right? I wouldn't be me unless I said that. But the point isn't that. The point is, how do you get engaged with the customers? How do you get the benefits? And I think this is where currently the businesses have lost sight. They don't quite know how to gauge with the individual consumers that make up a majority of their businesses. And this goes for the financial banking industry. They've learned over the years how to engage with B2B and big businesses and large customers and treat them like gold. But they don't quite yet know how to treat an individual banking customer like gold. And so therefore the idea that the individual owns their own data within their company walls is really foreign to a lot of people. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever called, say, a telephone company and said, I need to hear all the history of all my calls to support with you, you pretty much get crickets and silence on the other end of the line. The same goes with the banking or any industry for that matter. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and all that comes down to is governance and more open communication.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So in line with that, I will continue the rotation around. So Matt, from a Data Vault perspective, how are you using Data Vault at the moment?
We're using Data Vault as one of two of our main data warehousing components of our platform. It currently supports 8 different lending asset classes, which provide all the relevant information for our various services, which operates as a software as a service, both to the banking and non-banking lending aspects of the market, as well as institutional investors. Basically, our entire analytics platform is supported by Data Vault today, and we looked at this, and we've kind of supported and gone forward with Data Vault over the last several years for a number of reasons that's, I'm sure, have been talked about at length already this morning. But one of those is the traceability factor, and also the paramount requirement for privacy and control of commercially sensitive information. And the second piece is extensibility. And so while we are an organization supporting various use cases across financial services, we are looking at new data sets all the time. And I think one of the most attractive things for me about the Data Vault, as we use it in our platform, is the fact that we're able to look at new data structures, extend into those data structures with a low to no impact to our existing data models as we implement them. And that two-speed type approach, where we've got an existing hardened product platform where we can continue to service our clients in our core space and then explore into new areas rapidly, I think is a real positive. And there's different ways to achieve that, but Data Vault's certainly been a real interesting component of our platform to work with.
Cool, thank you. I'll actually stay with you to dig in a little bit further on there. So you've said you've been playing with Data Vault in recent times. What would be the major benefits you've seen in hitting up Data Vault? And on the converse, what were the hurdles that you've had to overcome, or maybe still have to overcome, in the organization?
Look, I think because Data Vault is a growing but still, I would say, a minority in the technical world across data practitioners, I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen in our personal experience is seeing champions of it, or seeing in implementing it on the technical side, those who are not across the standard, or who think maybe there are other ways to do it. And so there is a little bit of in my experience, a little bit of a tension there around getting the benefits of Data Vault and then having to, bring people on board with the concept. And because it's probably a 90-10 or an 80-20 split around those who are familiar and capable and supporting of Data Vault in the industry now, that's certainly been a bit of a challenge. Whereas you have other data methodologies that have been in practice for 30-odd years, and they're well understood and they're well embraced, and you don't see that natural, friction. And so that's a real challenge. The second challenge has been the automation piece, where I would certainly suggest to anyone going into this that they look thoroughly at automation, just the nature of Data Vault, and it's the way that the data is constructed and divided up. Having a really powerful automation capability, I think, really unlocks the potential of Data Vault. And for someone getting into it, I think the standard is very powerful, but you certainly want to be able to do it correctly and do it well. And I won't say that we've been perfect in our implementation, but I do see that I think it's really worthwhile in investing into a long-term view on how you're going to implement and then manage your Data Vault on an ongoing basis.
Cool, thank you. And I'll sort of take on from Matt in, are you just kind of, Dan, would you just repeat Matt's piece, or are there other things where you'd say in terms of where you normally see the challenges for somebody taking on Data Vault?
Normally the challenges are the first challenge, well, I would say is probably you get someone excited about Data Vault. And this individual is part of a larger company. And the first thing they go in and say to their management is, I want a Data Vault. That's the wrong thing to do. You don't sell Data Vault. As many of you know, you don't go in and say, I'm going to sell you a star schema. So you don't sell Data Vault. You want to solve the problem. So the challenge is understanding how to position or talk about answering the challenge. And that was mentioned in the earlier panel as well, in that you have to address the business at the business. And then when they get interested and they ask the question, how are you going to approach this? Then it's the right time to talk about it. Beyond that, once you've gotten the green light, you've gotten the funding, at least for proof of concepts or prototypes or whatever you want to build, then the next challenge is making sure that you're on board with someone who's certified or authorized in Data Vault 2. And I will tell you that there is a split between Data Vault 1 and Data Vault 2, as you heard as well just a minute ago. And Data Vault 1 is highly focused on just the model, and you heard here this morning multiple times, not just from me, how just the model isn't enough. You need methodology, governance, and everything else. So that's the next challenge, is getting people who are in favor of Data Vault to understand that it's bigger than just the model. But once you get beyond that hurdle, then the third challenge comes. It's okay, we need budget or funding for training. And then once you get the training ball rolling, then you can actually launch an initiative successfully and prove that it works. And beyond that, you can get buy-in.
Yeah, cool. And Knowles?
Well, the only remaining challenge that hasn't been addressed is the one of change management and culture change. Why is that so important? Well, we've got a room full of people with probably long, illustrious careers of being mavericks and rule breakers. So asking somebody then to come in and look at Data Vault and follow the rules is counter to what you've done for the last 30 years. So sometimes that's the hardest obstacle to do, is to essentially say, look, the reasons why these things exist, if you understand why, then, and you can motivate within the why that it's legitimate to change, by all means do so. But asking a culture and an industry of mavericks to follow the rules is probably one of the hardest things to do. So education certainly helps a lot, but there is a ongoing stay the course kind of championship that needs to occur within the organization, that essentially remains with the organization to ensure the culture to shift. Once the culture shifts, then you have the opportunity for that to then become more self-perpetuating, not necessarily required on a champion to keep it alive. But that's probably one of the long-term challenges for any Data Vault initiative, is to make sure that the culture, that change management program, wraps in there for the long-term success.
Cool. Thank you. And I'll put Matt slightly on the spot here. It was in the previous thing, and Dan's just repeated it, that the pilot, proof of concept, prototype, whatever you want to call it, I know that you went through one on the Data Vault side. Was that a critical part in terms of selling? Were there other business parts that you had to, by the by, prove out that this new concept was actually going to work?
I think that's certainly a critical part of investing in any kind of new technology or new methodology. I think it's very important that organizations prove to themselves that they are going down the right path. For us, I think we were mostly convinced or excited about the potential of the process, of the methodology for our specific business use case. To Dan's point, we had a specific business problem that we wanted to solve for, and we were looking for different approaches, and Data Vault in our research looked very promising. But I think it's foolish to go under any kind of large investment or major undertaking without getting some evidence to prove to yourselves that that you're on the right path. So I'm a big believer in early prototyping and POCs and developing kind of a spike around what you're trying to prove, and then iterating and building out from there. And as far as business cases from our side, same goes. If you're able to get people excited, that's one thing. But then if you're able to bring some proof points around how you plan to do it, and then you can actually be successful early on, I think that makes a really big difference in getting that funding and getting the backing for your project.
Cool, thank you. And I'll stay on you just for a final block in terms of any sort of low-hanging fruit that you did in respect of the inherent value all the way up through the organization, from IT across to business to product, that you actually sort of went, here's a little deck and here are the 3 things that Vault is going to do?
Look, low-hanging fruit may not be the perfect way to describe it, but what I would say is, from my perspective, the main thing is that extensibility piece and the traceability piece. And so if you've got a business use case where those things are very important, if you're in a highly regulated environment, if you are in an environment where you want to rapidly adjust the data that is relevant to the organization to be able to take in new data sets and make use of those data sets, that extensibility piece, I think, is a really powerful one. In that you can have, I think, a larger degree of comfort that you're not kind of touching. You're not touching most of what you already have in place, and you're able to do those types of proof of concepts or prototypes with new attributes quickly. To me, that's, as a product person, the ability to rapidly get into an idea and get something of value to be able to show to potential customers in those early days has a lot of value in it. And I think if Data Vault is done correctly, I think it really can unlock that.
That's the set of questions I have. Have we got any questions from the floor specifically for Matt, so we can let him go and continue delivering Data Vault product? Because, as I say, we're going to spend, I think, another 10 minutes for questions to the floor. So any questions for Matt, even his details, so that you can get your organization to talk to them about how you can get your financial services data through the Perpetual process. No. Thank you very much, Matt, for spending the time. And it's there is more than the black screen at this side. We have 30 or 40 people out here watching and listening. So thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you all.
Hello, there I am. So while we've got 3 smart guys and me on the stage, we thought we'd give you the opportunity to ask any questions. It's probably trickier to ask questions of Dan usually than it is right now. So we'll open it up to the floor for anyone who has any questions. Data Vault related would be good.
And I've also realised that I didn't say anything about myself and why you might want to ask me any questions. So I work for Cognition Studio, which is a partner within the Certus group, dealing mainly in strategy and innovation. So a lot of what I'm doing today is in that digital transformation journey, helping organizations mature their data management processes, integration, master data management, AI, various bits and pieces. So if you've got anything in and around that in respect of how the modern data management processes are what I'm seeing around the traps in both Australia and New Zealand, ask me.
So what's the most common reason that someone should start looking at Data Vault?
Most common reason.
In your
Everyone's
experience.
special. No,
Everyone's special, but all data's the same, right?
the realization that what they're doing is not working is, I think, the fundamental underlying thing that most organizations struggle with. And then for those that then do the due diligence, will scan the market and stumble upon, oh, there's this thing called Data Vault, so have a look at it. And then as the picture unfolds, typically there's a reasonable interest in that to essentially go from there. And so the challenges that typically are found are around the extensive regression testing, re-engineering, and lack of speed, because the business is demanding more and more and not getting any additional speed. So there is a dissonance, a basic business dissatisfaction with the level of service that's being delivered. And so for those that are truly looking for how to get to the point where they are on the front foot, we'll start looking around, and Data Vault invariably comes up in the conversation. So it may not be necessarily an enthusiast when they first encounter Data Vault, but they certainly become curious.
Yeah. And is that the same here, Dan, or is there a difference between
No,
how
it's
Australia
exactly
does it?
the same. Everywhere I go, it's exactly what Noel said. The people contact me and say, how do I get going in Data Vault? And I say, well, what are the problems you're trying to solve? And they tell me the problems they're trying to solve, but then I say, well, why Data Vault? And they say, well, because we've never tried it before. Or what most frequently what we have been doing isn't working anymore. We need a new approach.
And Northern Europe seems to be a bit of a hotspot for Data Vault. Is there a reason why they've adopted it?
Yeah, Northern Europe, okay, started off in the Netherlands in 2001 when I first published my articles. There was a consultant there who was a friend of mine. He read the articles and he said, I don't know why everybody isn't doing this. How soon can you come to the Netherlands and teach a class? I did not receive the same reception from anywhere else in the world. So he latched on to the articles. I went out there. Turns out he was an individual who was already, as an independent, connected with a majority of the corporations that were there. So he became an evangelist, and the Netherlands caught fire. And in the first 2 years of training out there in the Netherlands, we trained over 500 people, mostly consultants. But then it just spread across Europe. So down here, what originally brought me to Australia was in fact the Commonwealth Bank about 7 or 8 years ago. And they're here today. If you can find them, you can talk to them. They'll reveal themselves to you. But yeah, so they've been along the journey. They were the original reason. And they gave me exactly the same reason for engagement that we just talked about.
Yeah, great. So James, what about the business case?
A bit of the same there. I've been finding more and more organisations where, and I've been one of them. I arrived in at my last client-side job, and there were 10 enterprise data warehouses in the organisation. And that's the insanity part of going, hey, no, that one was rubbish, we'll create another one. It survives for about 2 years and then migrates over. So there's that, but also when an organisation merges, acquiring a new one, it is that point at which you go, right, I've got to bring these two organisations together from the data warehousing perspective as well as the operational perspective. And the sort of the choice used to be, right, which one's the better data warehouse that I migrate the data into? But then they realise as soon as they've done that, there's a bit of a kludge to get the data in, and they've lost all of the true history of that data. So finding a methodology that allows you to retain that history, to represent that history, but also to meld it with ongoing, they'll find Data Vault at some point pretty quickly in doing that, because it's the only thing that will give you the traceability, and the only thing I've seen that allows you to coexist for a period of time as the organisation matures.
So knowing you're doing lots of strategy and that sort of stuff, how do you frame that into a business case? If someone here was trying to get their management to agree to let them do a Data Vault, how do they frame that up.
It very definitely is. Data management professionals are usually the last people to get engaged in what goes on in the organisation. Somebody will pick a new application, pick a new product and go over and develop it, and then they'll assume that we've got it. Well, that's starting to change, that acknowledgement of data as an asset, data is really important information, and not just keeping on the status quo of, hey, I've got my dashboard, that's a cool dashboard, keep on sending that to me. That the business case for enabling the business to transition, but also to provide...
Your mic's not working.
It's probably me. Yeah.
You turned yourself off.
Yeah. Oh.
You turned me off too.
Is that on? Yeah, okay. Yes, sorry. So in business casing, there is definitely a bit in terms of, hey, I've got a newer, cheaper, using Snowflake, using automation tools that I can scale and move with the business. But that ability to transition with the business as those front-end platforms work and providing that in a way that I can utilize much of my existing team, I can develop and integrate much quicker and get instant traceability and refinement. And the other one that we're seeing a lot more of is actually using Data Vault as a migration tool. That fact that I can go, here is a source, here is all of the data that I have in that source that I need to get from A to B, that Data Vault, because of the fact of the raw vault and the true reflection of what's in source, everything else that I apply in transforming it to get it to that target system as an ingest is a business rule. So we've got a separation of raw vault and business vault. And also in migration terms, well, I may not want to migrate all of that historic data. It might still be of interest, I might still need to trace it, but in terms of an operational platform, the ability to say, I can drop that old systems data into the raw vault, do my transformations, but only pull the information that I want in that new system is a really powerful thing. And then one more piece, which is I do an extract from the new system, and I can do a fab reconciliation. So setting that organization up to as an agile organization that's changing all of their front office, where the data vault structure and processes can basically keep that going and respond to it at the speed and accuracy that the organization wants is, as I say, another one that we're seeing quite a lot out in the market.
Cool. Let's address some myths. So Matt talked a little bit about, 80% maybe of the market doesn't really know what Data Vault is. And you've mentioned going online and Googling. And what about getting data out of a Data Vault? Apparently it's hard. Who wants to take that one?
There's a big myth about that one.
Yeah.
A lot of people believe that getting data out of a data vault is difficult, it's slow, it's laborious. Once they understand that there are hub links and satellites, what they fail to recognize is that we use a couple of intermediate table structures called point in time and bridge to enable BI queries to run faster and to basically materialize. You can think of it as a materialized view in some regards. However, that's where the similarity stops. So they'll go the data vault route, they'll ignore the writings about point in time and bridge for whatever reason, and then they'll complain about all the left outer joins. And the other part to that is a lot of times I run into DBAs or admins or data architects that don't understand how to make their database fully performant in the first place. And it has nothing to do with the data vault, it has to do with managing the partitioning, if that's there, managing columnar, managing indexing, enabling foreign keys so the optimizer does its job properly. So there's a lot of underlying tech that just isn't understood anymore. You get onto...
Or it's surprising how few of them actually know how to write a SQL that performs. Sorry, I have to call it out because this is something I'm finding quite prevalent in the inability of people to write queries. I don't know whether it's because we've had too much exposure to tools or those type of things. But even then, if you understand the principles, the patterns, the automation that's available, exposing that to the end user where they essentially consume their virtual marts with the necessary go fast structures underneath, they don't care, they're getting the answer that they're after. But as far as from a technical team is concerned, yeah, sometimes it's a skill issue and it's not a technology, a method or an approach or even a design problem, it's a skill problem.
So knowing we've got Richard coming up shortly, one for James maybe. So MDM outside of Data Vault as a service orientated thing, or MDM or single view of customer in the Data Vault? What's the right way to go?
Oh, both. It depends one. So there will be a number of organisations and bits and pieces around the open data will start surfing this, where the operational data store and the operational view in master data management is a requirement. The way that things like microservices are coming in, though, that it truly is. It's more linking the data together than it is truly getting that golden record out that's going to be used for everybody in the operational side. Very definitely on the customer, slightly different on the supplier, but again, as we move into that area where we're cloud orientated and we're software as a service, it's sort of driving function to where it should be. That we'll get fewer and fewer where I've got a function where I'm managing supplier over here and managing it in another system. That's not to say that it can't generate somewhere and migrate to another, but I think we're seeing this bringing in the fully functionalized component up in the cloud. And so the what would be termed a physical MDM is going to get less and less prevalent, which I'm happy with because they're an absolute nightmare. That sort of then gets to the virtual side, and I was actually probably 10 years ago where I started looking at the graph orientation. So I was digging a lot in media and behavior, digging a lot in the financial services and retail, and saying, well, there is something to graph. I can look at an individual and I can bring all of their products and their interactions together and do that. But then I've got a household and I've got what's happening between households. People sharing Netflix accounts. That's actually an interesting behavioral thing and is quite graph orientated in creating my own links where I believe there's a connection between there. I think that's the way virtual MDMs will be going in terms of bringing that together as we're feeding through more and more machine learning, more and more these things, understanding behavior and acting upon it. That will go through. But it's from a physical MDM leading in, that's a lead in to what's within your raw vault, but perceived as a business vault structure, I would say. And then everything else in terms of virtual MDM is going to be, it's a business vault structure that just runs through with your flow at the frequency that your business needs it.
Great. So thank you very much.
Thank you.